So Dianne Feinstein, Democratic Senator for California, released a letter to the Washington Post, and Christine Blasey Ford stepped forward later claiming authorship and began testifying to this sexual assault claim against Kavanaugh 36 years prior at a high school party. Two other women stepped forward with their own claims, but we're focusing on this specific one, and he ardently denied all of them. So after this, the 27th of September is when they have the Kavanaugh-Ford hearings themselves, and both parties sat in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee at separate times. Christine Blasey Ford was additionally questioned by Rachel Mitchell, who is a sex crimes prosecutor out of Arizona. Both went through questionings, sat through the hearings, and then on the 27th, Jeff Flake asked for an FBI investigation to proceed before they took a full vote to the floor. And then at the Senate floor, it passed 50-48 to confirm Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. And this was the peak of everything. This was very much the climax of this event. And this all ties back to my media and politics class and the formation of the fundamentals of my paper. Reading this textbook, Mass Media and American Politics, gave me the foundation to understand why the media was covering it so much, why it was a part of the media cycle really, what was so interesting, and began to show me exactly three specific things actually. They detailed ownership, regulation, and the guidance of media. They also talked about newsmaking, news reporting, and routines. And lastly, they talked about the media coverage of Congress and courts, which gave me a very solid foundation to look at this specific incident with a little bit more specificity. And this past month, and 2 months, pardon me, it's been a longer semester than I thought. Jonathan Haidt is a social psychologist and discusses the moral foundations theory in his novel, The Righteous Mind. This balanced the technical side that I had found in the media reporting, and has led me to discover that in this very specific media cycle, just how media companies both intentionally and unintentionally activate the morals that impact political and social divisiveness. And those are really found in the moral foundations theory, but I'll talk about that more after we discuss mass media and the American politics book that I've been talking so much about. So we start with ownership and regularization. Like you're gonna pass over that, sorry. In the US, outright government ownership and control over the media is very limited, which has kind of allowed for government-owned cable TV systems to operate on these private systems as well. And the US government is involved in media in other ways. They do a lot of broadcasting for the military and for foreign agency and policy purposes. The textbook really outlines the costs and benefits of this. Consolidation of ownership tends to make us question if local news needs are being heard fully, and if those are if they have enough money to cover them, what it really comes down to. We start to see a uniformity in news when everybody's starting to try and get the best coverage or the most attractive coverage of one event. We see it come up a lot. And another benefit actually is that big news corporations can reach more people. They have a very broad audience, and they have a lot of people working internationally. They have very good coverage that way, and lots of qualified journalists, and they have lots of money, so they can get the information they need. So this all comes into new media, which is set around digital media, and which is what I looked at, online publications. Digital media includes laptops, anything tech-based, and has proved to be additional competition for broadcasting as well. So they have one more person outside of the big six monopoly that really controls media they also have to work with dealing with online publications. So there's 5 criteria for selecting news stories, and this also comes into gatekeeping as well. Gatekeepers must decide and choose a specific message. They have to decide how they want to frame each item before publishing it, and lots of the things that go into what's chosen has to do with what will hit. Now, strong impact has something to do with, could this happen to an everyday person? Is this something that's relevant to our ordinary lives? Is this something that's relevant to the audience themselves? Violence, conflict, disaster, and scandal is a pretty self-described one. We know that scandal and sex sells. People want to see something engaging, and news is starting to move towards spectacle a lot. But another part of that is familiarity. Do we know who this person is? Is this person that we're seeing up in the news cycle a celebrity, a well-known politician? Those are usually stories that are going to get chosen and reported. Proximity is very simple. Is it international, national, very local? It depends on the publication itself. Americans are very inclined to look at American news more than international news. And lastly, is it timely and is it novel? Is it unique? Is this really relevant? Is it produced on time? And is the coverage still relevant when it's happening? So the Kavanaugh-Ford hearings absolutely have all of this criteria, and makes us start to see the effects of gatekeeping a little bit more as well. And to be very brief and go over those really quickly, we see the same publicized familiar people again and again because of this. And another note, gatekeepers and editors really have to make these quick decisions, as detailed by Graeber and Dunway. They have to make these decisions very quickly. The news cycle is very quick. You can't take a lot of time to think about it, and decisions must be made to make coverage happen. To fully follow the story and make sure that periodical and substantial coverage is met, we tend to see a lot of conflict in action, is what they call it in Dunway and Graeber's textbook. But just seeing the full fruition of a coverage is very common because of gatekeeping. And lastly, surface level coverage tends to mix in soft coverage and everything that's kind of short of hard news. These are kind of, these tend to be a focus for broadcast media companies because it's surface level and it engages more of a wide audience. Now, with all of that said, I found that after discovering the moral foundations theory and looking at this more, I do kind of challenge this idea that surface level coverage is becoming more and more common. I do agree with that, but after really looking at Haidt's moral foundations theory, which is based off of 5 foundational counterparts. The first is the Care Harm Foundation, which really focuses on protecting children. It makes us despise cruelty or being subjected to that. The Fairness Cheating Foundation is basically about being wary of exploitation. We don't want to get exploited, and we want to make good collaborative relationships. Pardon me. The Loyalty Betrayal Foundation is really rooted in an us against them mentality. If you betray the team or are not adhering to this team that you've associated with first, there will be serious repercussions because of that. And then the Authority Subversion Foundation is really rooted in forging relationships that benefit our social hierarchy. and really keeps in mind that our behavior is associated with our status. So if we act out of our roles, then there's also going to be repercussions. And lastly, the Sanctity Degradation Foundation, to quote Haidt, includes the behavioral immune system, which makes us very wary of a diverse array of symbolic objects and threats. This makes it possible for people to invest objects with irrational and extreme views. This is what keeps people together. So, I'm going to go through headlines a little bit quickly, but these are all the headlines that I have been looking at and have been using as a small case study to see how Haidt is informing maybe not all of these foundations at once, but at least trying to target one of them. So the first headline that we have, Kavanaugh hearing. Supreme Court nominee insists on his innocence and calls the process a national disgrace. So the first thing that really grabs me when I first saw this is the targeting of our national process. To say that something a part of our nation, that something's so highly revered, to say that it's a national disgrace is part of Kavanaugh's choosing himself, but to include that in a headline makes it very divisive and pries off of our association with our nation and how we see that as, what's another word for sanctity? Sorry. And next we have the Ford Kavanaugh hearings, which will be remembered as a grotesque display of patriarchal resentment. And another note that I just want to tag in real quick, the last one was from the Washington Post. This is from the New Yorker. I tried to get a medley of very different publications. I also got CNN and Politico, which I realize are kind of left centrist, but it's what we got. And so to really focus up, the Kavanaugh Ford hearing will be remembered as a grotesque display. That rhetoric right there is very, it kind of grabs at your throat, right? When you hear it and you hear yourself say it back, it doesn't feel right. And that's a very specific use of the word grotesque display. And to bring in the patriarchy in this moment also plays off of our sanctity degradation systems, which is saying that people who hold the patriarchy to a higher standard are going to be very interested on clicking this, and they're already frustrated. They want to know more. And here we have basically two quotes pinned up against each other. Blasey Ford is saying that she was 100% certain of the claim, and Kavanaugh saying he's 100% innocent. This inherently makes us feel that somebody is being exploited. There's a breach of fairness and a breach in all of these things. This immediately hits our Fairness Cheating Foundation. Next, this is what terrified me most. Key moments from the Christine Blasey Ford testimony. So the word terrified, this is also an opinion piece, so I'll give it that. But this really goes into our Care Harm Foundation and sits us in almost next to and with Christine Blasey Ford. By just mentioning her name, we're kind of taken away from maybe the whole of the whole event and positioned to agree or disagree with her a little bit more. And lastly, from Fox News, the Democrats believe the all-women fraud. This sets us up in loyalty and betrayal right away. It's us against them. Tammy Bruce is a well-known news anchor for the Fox, or not news anchor, she's a contributor. So we know that this is a tag against the other team. And believe the all-women's fraud is very divisive language that again puts us into more segments, whether you be somebody who agrees with Me Too or doesn't agree with that, you're inherently taken out of all of the context that you kind of need before going into what happened with the event itself. And to wrap it up very quickly, in a political media climate that seems to prioritize spectacle, the manner in which news is presented over the matter of which is at hand, we must alternatively reflect on our own biases, morals that drive our divisive discussions, and begin to act and speak and listen more intentionally. All of the tenets that really hold up journalism, like reflection and diligence, objectivity, and obligation to truth, are all things that I greatly admire and inspire me every day about the profession. And I know that with all of these things in the back of our mind, that they propel the possibility of union across political parties. And we must be the ones to demand that as the American media consumers. And I have a lot of hope going forward. So thank you very much.